Good evening. Welcome to the museum at FIT's Fashion Culture Special Program Series. Tonight, it is our sincerest pleasure to welcome Thom Browne in conversation with Stefano Tonchi. Thom Browne received the CFDA Menswear Designer of the Year Award in 2006, 2013, and 2016. He also received the GQ Designer of the Year Award in 2008 and the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in 2012. He began his business in 2001 and introduced his ready-to-wear collection in 2003. His traditionally based handmade suits have been recognized by museums around the world, including the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Fashion Museum in Bath. Stefano Tonchi has been editor-in-chief of W Magazine since March 2010. Under his direction, W has been a finalist 11 times for the prestigious ASME Awards and has received 20 medals from the Society of Publication Designers. Prior to W, Mr. Tonchi was the creator and editor-in-chief of T, the New York Times Style magazine. From 1998 to 2003, Mr. Tonchi was the fashion creative director for Esquire. He is co-author of Uniform, Order, and Disorder, among other publications. Please join me in welcoming Thom Browne and Stefano Tonchi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, the lights the lights are great, actually, because I cannot see you. That makes me feel much more comfortable. Yeah, thank you for being with us tonight. As you know, I don't know how you voted and what you did and how you spent the night, but
we all look really tired.
Yes, exactly, and there is a reason we were up, and I suppose many of us suffering through the night. But here we are, and I think there is no better subject to start a new political age than uniforms and power of uniforms and the meaning of uniforms. I will start with something personal. I mean, sure, I think you all have seen the exhibition that is next door, Uniformity, where you can see kind of the importance of uniforms in the history of dressing. So you saw the evolution and the application of the idea of uniform in so many different fields of dressing. I think we all know in this room how important they are and what is the history behind each one of them. So I wanted to start with something kind of personal, because let's try to have kind of a good time and a personal time. I know Thom for many, many years, and I think from any kind of my memories, and I'm talking about really 15 years or more, I remember him wearing like his own uniform, a uniform that he created for himself. It is a button-down shirt with a gray tie and a suit that maybe is a little lighter, a lighter tone of gray in the summer, and a little darker and heavier in the winter, but it is his uniform. Uniform usually, are fashion in a capsule. What I mean is that they really are used to signify which group we belong to and who we want to be apart from. My question for Thom is like, how did you come to this uniform, and who do you identify yourself with?
I mean, for me, the conversation really comes down to, I think it's both uniforms and uniformity. For me, the initial uniform was basically just my designing something that I wanted for myself. And the idea of uniformity for me was, there's something that, it's an idea that I feel speaks to power and individuality And I think that surprises some people when you say individuality and uniforms. but I think there is a true individuality when it comes to somebody that can adopt a uniform for themselves that really makes them a real, true individual. As long as it's really personal to them and it's very real. And that's what, my uniform has been from the beginning. It's something that I've always wanted myself, and that's what I think people, saw after a while, that it was real. It wasn't something that I thought up and thought like, oh, I think I'm going to do this because I want to, make a uniform for myself. It was very genuine. It was very simply just something that I wanted for myself. And also, too, it was something that's, for me personally, simplified, the act of getting dressed in the morning. I could get dressed in the dark. It's very easy. But I think,
Yeah, we are all very curious to know what your wardrobe looks like.
it looks...
Is it like American Psycho, like, white shirts, gray ties,
it's not that neat,
gray
but,
suit?
yeah. But it's very, I like one thing, and I really like that aesthetic, and I like the idea of it. But then, like, more important than just the uniform, I think, me being in the world of fashions, I really didn't, think of myself as entering the world of fashion at the beginning. I really just wanted to make really well-made clothing, and reintroduce, tailored clothing to guys and to girls in a way that was, one, really well-made, because I think sometimes the most fashionable things are something that's beautifully made, but also, too, that played with proportions that, so that you saw something that was very classic, but you saw it, done the way that I wanted to show people. And I think there was something really strong about the message of it being a very, like, singular story.
Yeah, I think this talked about making it something that has a lot of meaning for you, but also can talk to people and communicate some sense of belonging is so important. I mean, we are clearly talking about what I would call like modern uniform, civil uniforms.
Yeah.
This uniform, they somehow, that is the gray suit that became part of the male wardrobe in the, 19th century? I think you can correct. There are people here that can correct me. But, men were very colorful, and their wardrobe was much similar to the female wardrobe in the 16th and 17th century. But later it became this uniform like of a kind of the dark suit that somehow is connected to military uniforms that are really probably the beginning of the modern male dressing, for sure, is at the base of male dressing. And you have looked at, I think, at this history of uniforms through your work. Yeah. I mean, behind us we have images that show a lot of that evolution coming from military uniforms as a prototype, as a starting point. Oh, okay, sorry. I will do my best. So I was talking about, should I repeat, or I was just talking about how military uniforms are at the roots of any kind of civil uniform that we wear today. And clearly when we were talking about Thom's uniform, we were talking about a civil uniform more than a military uniform. But still, military uniform has been very important in the evolution of the point and the things that Thom has been presenting.
Yeah, I mean, for me, through different collections, I have, I guess, explored the idea of more, military-type uniforms. But for me, the idea of, and then it's a lot of people have explored military uniforms. And for me, the idea of uniformity and taking, I guess, more non-military uniform ideas and, making it a uniform idea is a lot more interesting in the way that I approach, a lot of my other collections. Or, it's really sometimes the collections don't, speak to uniforms at all, but the idea of the way that the collections are designed are in a very organized, very uniform way. So it's not only
And presented in a
Yeah.
very kind of
Right.
almost military formation.
Right. Like even in this show you see here, I mean, of course there was 40 different plaid fabrics, and based on the classic ideas of what my clothing had really been based around, but there was such a uniform and very strong individual story that went into that collection in the way that it started, and then of course throwing in some non-uniform ideas to make that uniform more interesting.
So in a certain way, you can take that kind of creativity that you put in every single piece of of a collection, but presented in a very uniform way, or in a very, I would say, military way.
Yeah, because I think even just to my last point, the way that we all work in the office, I think it's a very personal way for me of working in a very uniform. There's something I swam growing up, so there was a lot of discipline in just my life when I was a kid in regards to my life being very organized, and I think there's something very comforting for me in regards to working that way. And even the way that the collections are designed, they're really designed from head to toe at the beginning. And I feel like that uniformity is very important, because I know that the story that I'm telling will be exactly the story I want people to see, because of how militant I am in regards to that way of working.
How focused.
I'm not as boring as it sounds, but but it keeps it easier.
Well, I mean, I think you always leave space to imagination and also interpretation. I mean, I'm often at shows of yours, and different people has completely different read of what you want to say.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and also too, even in that, I do love when people do interpret the shows in different ways, and I think that's very interesting to me. I think it's nice to put ideas in front of people, and then for people to have different almost experiences, and I think that is one of the most important things that I like to express in the shows.
Talking about the shows, talking about the clothes, talking about menswear uniforms, I mean, there is something that is typical of uniforms, but is also typical of any of the fashion garments that we look at, and for sure many of the clothes that you design. This need for theater, and it needs for, I would say, function. On one side, I mean, that's what uniforms were like in history, when you think about, the Prussian, the King of Prussia and German uniforms, and that need for scaring people, for creating drama, think about the hats, the feathers, and the bright colors or the dark colors. And on the other side, you have the functionality of uniform, that are the first kind of form of ready to wear. I mean, also they have to respond to different weather conditions, different situations, different movements, different bodies. So when you build clothes, I think you want one and the other in a certain way. In that sense, you're building uniforms, you are building clothes that have to kind of, in a certain way, talk to you and create emotions, and on the other side, they have to be functional.
Yeah.
How do you play these two?
Well, I think the most important thing is to approach it. I think everybody approaches it differently. I definitely approach my collections from a more provocative point of view. I do like to make people think, and I like to tell a story, and I like to entertain. And some collections are more provocative than others, but the most important thing for me is that people see things in a different way, and it makes people think. And some people hate them, some people like them, And I think I would rather those, differing opinions as opposed to just somebody just liking them. But I think the most important thing, too, in regards to as provocative as you get, is the function and the way that something is made. And I think I would never put something in a collection in front of people as provocative as the idea is. I would never just jerry-rig something together for shock value. I've done things in my collections. I've done three-legged trousers and, things like that. And it was as seriously thought out as a classic pair of trousers. So I think it is really important when you want to, especially in regards to being theatrical or being provocative. I think the most it does have to be followed through with some type of function.
Yeah, because I have in mind so many shows where your clothes had an incredible theater presence. I remember like one in Paris where like incredible uniforms really and the construction was so strong, so important that was almost difficult for the movement.
Yeah. Well, between the fabrics and listen. But, yeah.
So sometimes you do like a coup de théâtre, no? A little bit of.
Yeah, but I also do approach the shows too from, truly a design and provocation, and some. Of course, you have people like who would wear that, or how many will you sell, and that's not always the point. It's really there.
I agree.
If you were to see in the showroom, there are versions of that are more wearable and express the idea that you see, but it's that piece literally is not always the one that's going to sell. But we surprisingly do sell most of them, not all. But.
And how do you feel innovation, technology is taking an important role in your work? I mean, especially working in your collaboration with Moncler, there is a lot of technical developments that you do with them. And sometimes, I know Remo, that is the owner of the company, and he always talks about like kind of your imagination and, pushing the boundaries of what can be done.
I think that, you always have to look for what's happening next and how you can just push, especially when you base a collection in classic ideas. You have to make sure that you do introduce them or reintroduce them in ways that are relevant, because there's nothing worse than doing something classic and it's still classic, and it's there's no reason for people to see it over again. So I think there's always, every collection there is in differing ways. I mean, whether it's fabric or whether it's, different shapes or, or even the way that the collection is shown, is sometimes, it's just, I think it's important to, make it seem like you're thinking about, not just keeping things moving.
Mm-hmm. Do you think innovation comes more from the fabric, from the research on fabrics and yarns, or more from like research on forms? I mean, what interests you more deeply these days in particular? I mean, I don't know, I'm very fascinated by the fact that, I don't know, at Nike, they are saying that everything will be knitted in the future, and there will be
what?
Knitted. I mean, from shoes to garments, I mean, every new garment that they're putting out is basically knitted.
Yeah, I think I couldn't say one thing is more interesting than the other. I think all of it is, and we work with so many good people that introduce differing ideas in regards to, everything. And I think that's what makes every collection, as interesting as the last. I think sometimes at the end of one collection, you always think like, what am I going to do now? And it always seems like there's always new things happening that, that are introduced that can, change even the most basic idea into something really interesting.
Well, I mean, looking at your work, and this is like a very personal opinion, I think you have shown that innovation can come just from the change of proportions. I mean, the first discovery that I have of your work was just a very, I would say, traditional suit, but the proportion of that suit were changed radically, and actually they had been, and that little change of proportion, you know, the shortening of the jacket, the pants, the waist point, and all of that really changed like history of menswear for the last 10 years. I mean, I think it's been, I mean, this is like I mean, I have to give credit to Thom for changing the shape of menswear in the last 10, 15 years, and really, I mean, holding that point through all your career, I think. I want to talk about something else for a minute, actually, about something that I was looking at the show that is across the street, Uniformity, and in one of the notes there, they say that uniform are the opposite of couture. Somehow, and really like uniform are the opposite of couture because they are the first application of ready-to-wear, is the place where we look for kind of where sizing happens, and like where like saving in fabrics and mass production happen through history. So in your work, you have been always kind of walking like a very on the line between couture and something that is more like pret-a-porter or like ready-to-wear.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this line?
Yeah, I think, I think as it could be simply said that I approach, I think, very uniform ideas from and I would never give myself credit to say like at couture level, but at the best level that I can really achieve. And I think that's what makes that uniform idea more interesting, because it is very important to me on the level of quality of how the collections are put together and made. So I guess it's basically that. I mean,
Well, it's like it's that idea of uniform doesn't become uniformity because each piece
right.
very often, especially in your runway collection, becomes unique because there is so much work. It's really like a couture piece.
Right.
I mean, think about the embroideries and the work on the fabrics. I mean,
Yeah, so it's more really the ideas are like, because the first menswear show here, menswear week here in New York, I did a show really bringing back the idea of just the best handmade tailoring that you can make here in New York. And it was all, 30 of the exact same suit, but they were all, 30 different fabrics. And so it was a very uniform idea, but it was at the level of the best hand tailoring in the world. So it's speaking to that. It's really speaking to a very uniform idea at the best level.
I love that definition of uniform couture.
Because it's really more of the mentality than it is really what the actual garment is.
So you started your women's collection. When was it?
Well, I've been doing women's really from when I was down on Little West 12th Street. So I've been doing the tailoring for women's really from the beginning. But the first true collection was maybe 4 years ago? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you find like working on women very different in terms of like, men do like to buy the same thing over and over, especially if they find like that kind of security in it, that kind of fit that, actually they they get very upset if they cannot find that fit anymore, or
Yeah.
if something changes in their favorite shoes or in their favorite like toothpaste for that matter. So women are much more adventurous, and
Yeah.
I think change is part of the of, 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 of the way of thinking in a certain way. I mean, absolutely.
It is.
How do you approach like women's wear in a different way from menswear, or
I approach women's the exact same way as men's, but it is certainly a different audience. And I think everybody that works with me, I'm sure, could tell you a story. I think there is such power in that uniform idea for girls as well. I think actually, I think it's more powerful for, in the women's world. And I think, I think because there is so much out there for girls, and I think there is so much choice, and I think there is so much, so much reason for them to be able to try different things. And I think the idea of adopting a uniform in regards to the women's world, I think there's something so powerful, because I think there is something so powerful about somebody that looks like they have found their, like, a really true sense of their own style, and they stick to it day to day, as opposed to thinking like they may want to change, and Monday they may want to look like this, or Tuesday. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing that myself, and I do understand that.
but boys do it too.
Yeah, no, boys do.
I
so
mean-
it is a very personal thing, and it is a very personal approach too. And I think it is something that I have a lot of conversations with women in the women's world, and I think there's something. I think the best collections in the world and the best designers that have have been designing the last 100 years. You know what they've done. You have an image in your head of what they stood for, and I think that is the true sense of like a uniform idea. It wasn't like that they were wearing the same thing every day, but like when you think of Chanel, you have an image in your head of Chanel. You think of Miuccia, you have an image of what that is. Armani, you have an image in your head.
Sensibility, yeah.
So it's like it's more that sense. It's not that like
It's not necessarily the clothes.
Yeah, it's more like establishing like a
codes,
uniform
yeah.
like aesthetic.
And do you think that those codes are merging between men and women as we see more and more, I would say, clothing that is not exactly unisex, it's more like, almost like dual gender in terms of like things that pass from his wardrobe to her wardrobe and so on?
I think so. I think, one, I love tailoring on women. So I think there is something really beautiful about the two collections,
Well, and
almost having the same sensibility.
you clearly have not been afraid in many of your men's collection to use a lot of the women's vocabulary, I think, in terms of decor or in terms of color or in terms of like prints, things like that. So you see a certain kind of fluidity in that sense.
I really do. And I think it really speaks to real confidence and true individuality, because it has nothing to do with the trend. It has nothing to do with anything other than somebody having a true sense of themselves and a true sense of sometimes having more interesting things to think about other than clothes. And
So you feel, do you have a sense of comfort or of panic when you see like one of these science fiction movies where everybody is wearing the same leotard? What is your reaction?
I love like those type of ideas. So, it's a movie, so. No, I've done shows that basically could be, that type of movie. So I love the idea of, multiplication and,
But in a very couture way.
In a very well-made way. But we have, the last time we were in, the last time, I was only in St. Petersburg once, but the one time we were there, we have an interesting story. We got off the plane and we were standing waiting for our luggage, and there were 20 of the exact same bag. They came off the belt, and I said, somebody has to take a picture of this because it is the coolest thing that I've ever seen. I think there's something very personal, and it is something that I love, the idea of that aesthetic.
Going back for a minute to kind of military influences. Well, Diana Vreeland said that uniforms are the sportswear of the 20th century, all right? I
said
think Diana Vreeland.
Oh.
I think that more than ever, I mean, that kind of military uniform inspiration is everywhere in fashion. You have never seen so many, I don't know, peacoat and trench coats and army pants and a lot of things that you don't do, by the way.
Yeah.
Even if you have a little fascination with camouflage, or you have had some.
Yeah.
So what do you think, why are we still so fascinated by this wardrobe? Is it the power of memory? Is it the power of
I think it's
film
familiar.
icon?
I think it's familiar. And I think there's something very comforting for people in something that's familiar. And I think it's as simple as that. I mean, I have used those references a lot in collections too, but I also want to make sure that it's not something that looks so literal to that reference. But I think there is a familiarity that is comforting to people, and I think that's especially important if you're going to put some type of provocative idea in front of people. You do have to ground it in something that they understand, and I think that the military reference, whether it be the fabric or the camouflage or some other type of shape, I think people will. They'll understand why you're doing it, as provocative as it is, and it might not be for them, but I think there's comforting in the familiarity and understanding too.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, one of those subjects, those themes that you cannot escape. Yeah. There is not a collection in menswear or women's wear where there are not very clear reference to kind of a military kind of codes and fabrics and continuously. I mean, sure, I think is this idea of comfort, the idea of something that is traditional but you can play with.
Well, and also too, I think to your point of unisex too, I think it does play very well for both men and women.
Yeah, and you can mix it with anything, and suddenly it becomes like kind of laid back and acceptable. Yeah. Which one of, I mean, we were going through like your fashion shows. Which one of your fashion shows has left a strong memory in your in these many years of shows? I mean, do you have one show that you cannot forget? Or one that you want to forget?
No, I can't say there's one that I've always loved my shows, and I've always I think sometimes love my shows more than anybody else, which I think is important, because I feel I would never want to put something in front of somebody that I wasn't in love with myself, and I think that is important. But in regards to one being better, I mean, it's like asking a parent who's your favorite child. There's the show in Pity that, of course, I think was important because it was the first show in Europe, which introduced the show, what I did to Europe.
It was in an incredible location, I think.
Yeah, the location, everything, it all came together really well. But I think every show there's very
story to
individual,
tell.
and they're a different story, but they all are based on really where it started, and they're based on that classic idea where it's, you know, that gray suit that started, you know, 10 years, 13 years ago.
Yes. Good. I think we can open the room to some questions, if we want to.
We can't see you, so I don't know how we're gonna. Yes. Okay, guys. Any questions? Mhm. It's really important. We definitely don't approach it from a small, medium, large. It's, it all depends on how you approach it. I mean, different people will approach it differently, but I know how I approach, you know, the proportion and the sizing is a lot more individual than, you know, small, medium, large. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah. So I didn't hear that. The question was what's my market positioning and who's my competitor?
Well, this is a should
You know
I?
what?
Oh, somebody.
It's the type of course, it's important to think of those type of things, but I have to be honest. I feel like.
He's a designer, is not like
Yeah,
the CEO of the company.
I mean, I'm very conscious of, the positioning is I do tailored based clothing for men and women that are, based in playing with proportion and provocative ideas. So I guess that's my positioning. And competitors, I never think of competing with anybody. I think everybody should just stay true to themselves, and I think the worst thing you can start doing is competing with somebody else.
I have some questions here from the audience. Okay. This is, I think, is a nice one. What is the greatest change you think fashion needs to see today?
I think probably the most important thing is that design is approached more individually, as opposed to, I think there's too much of the same out there. And I think there needs to be some more unique approaches to design.
Well, I think I would echo you in that, saying that I think somehow we need to reduce the quantity of fashion that we produce, because that would make the thing produced more valuable, more special, more unique, more also time sensitive in a certain way. You know, what happened when, you really want something that is always available? You really don't want it anymore somehow, and that's what's happening. I mean, now you just go online and somewhere, somehow, they will find it, anything in your size. And that kind of destroys the desire, I think. I mean, make things more desirable. That's really like what I think has to change in a certain way. We produce too much. There is too much out there, and I think it's about limiting, like, somehow the production and making things that can have a more value, less, I would say, fast fashion and more meaningful fashion.
Yeah, quality. Just the attention to quality.
Another question that always come in and is like, who are your favorite designers?
You know, you do get asked a lot, but for me, I think I respect anybody that really approaches their collections and their design in truly their own way. And that's the most inspiring to me, is somebody that is very true to themselves and, approaches it that way.
Do you see your work as art? Oh, that's opening.
That's for other people to say. I would never. I love designing collections, and I love making clothing, and that type of question I think is up for other people. More like Stefano or for Andrew to say.
And this one I think is like interesting. Why the red, white, and blue is your fetish motive? How did it come up, actually?
Yeah, it's one of those like simple, starting your own business stories that I was at Mokuba one day looking for grosgrain to put in the sleeve ends of my jacket, and I happened to like the red, white, and blue, and it stuck. So there's no like grand story, no political story. There's no, it's just something that I found.
Something about vintage that I think is kind of interesting. Can you talk about your views on vintage, or the idea of clothing with multiple lives?
Well, I think I've done a collection, very recently on the idea of clothing that sometimes I think gets better and better with age. And I think there is something really beautiful when you walk into a store. And speaking to your point about what we need now more is clothing that can actually have more lives, because I think, one, it's important, from a sustainability point of view, is that it's important that we make things really well so that it's something worth spending the money on, and also, too, it is something that can, you can have forever, or if you don't, that then somebody else can actually, enjoy it.
Another one here that comes up very often and is very practical, actually. What makes you decide to start your own brand? And what kind of advice would you have for a fashion student? And we can talk about that, as it is such a topic.
Well, I think the most important thing, I really started because I was working at Club Monaco, and I was learning a lot in regards to the business, but the level of where it wasn't very personal to me, and I started my own collection for very personal reasons. Was I wanted to do tailored clothing at the best level that I could find, and so in regards to it, that's how I started. And for anybody else, I think the most important thing is to just be really true to yourself, because it is so easy for people to give you advice and for them to maybe make you second guess what you're doing. But I think if you do something that is so true to who you are and what you want to put in front of people, it's never going to happen overnight. And if you're in the business to make money or to be famous, then you're in the wrong business. I think it's important to just really love making clothing and putting interesting ideas in front of people at a really at a level that the quality is as good as you can get.
I think that you were working somewhere and you were making your kind of experience. I think it's very important for a student to work in a studio and to kind of learn a little bit from the inside. I think there is a little bit too much of a rush to go on your own and start your own company and and falling into like this kind of vortex of experiences and trying to be commercial because you have to sell so you can put together the next collection. I think there is a value in education in schools as in atelier and in places, and also trying different experiences in different places. I mean, you want to work maybe, you know, for some years in a great tailoring house, and then for a few years in a great knitwear factory, or like learn how to make great shoes. So you have a little bit of a knowledge, and you can decide where you really want to be and what you really want to do. I think, especially here, in this country, I've seen like this kind of continuous like a race against age. And I don't think it's paying off somehow, because it takes time to build your brand, and it takes time to have, I think, your identity built. And that's, I think, what Thom has been talking about. When you go on your own, you have to be really, really strong and resilient and stay faithful to what you believe in, and not bend to, you know, many suggestions and many commercial like push to the left, to the right, and that, you know, will bring you like very far from where you wanted to be. So I think working with mature people and learning and trying a little bit of humility, I think can kind of pay off in the long run. I don't know, there are so many questions here. And I think we'll take...
We're actually out of time,
Okay.
unfortunately.
All
No,
right.
sorry to cut off all of this, but it's been such a pleasure, and I really hope that all of you
Thank
will
you very
join
much.
me.
Yeah, again,
in
thank you
welcoming
for being
so
with us
much, having
and taking
Thom.
our mind away from everything else.
Thank you.